Hey, how's it going? In this video, I want to talk about Australian cinema. The cinema with the most uses of the C word imaginable. I'd say it now, but I would get demonetized. So let's not talk about the swear words and let's talk about the movies. I'm actually barreling this into 5 different genres, which has a selection of films, because I had too many films that I wanted to reference. These are some of my favourite Australian films. They give you a good range of diversity in terms of what you can get in terms of directing and acting and casting and landscape and all this kind of stuff, from genres to narratives to everything. These symbolise Australian stories in some very interesting and dramatic ways, but also just show how varied and vast our landscape and culture really is when it comes to the filmmaking process. Most of these you've probably heard of, if not absolutely all of these, and if that is the case, then cool, you're awesome in my books. If you haven't seen any of these, I recommend all of them. So let's dive into it. My first genre I wanted to tackle is horror, because you know me, I like myself some horror films. My main one I wanted to display for this film is Lake Mungo, which is a 2008 film. I believe it's 2008. Me with my bad horror knowledge is bad. Lake Mungo. Yeah, 2008. A film directed by Joel Anderson. This is a found footage kind of documentary film. It's not really found footage, but it's like they find footage along the way. Yeah, basically. It's more of a kind of documentary-esque. It's not real. It's very Blair Witch inspired. I think it has some of the most terrifying imagery I've seen in a horror film. One of the scariest images I've seen in a horror film especially. But it's constantly creepy. It's a ghost film, but it's also like a drama focusing on a family who have lost someone. It's compelling, it's enriching. To a lot of people, sure, it could just be bad documentary, kind of boring, but it depends on how you want to really look at it. But for me, it was genuinely scary, and it's one of the few films that have actually scared me, and has lasting imagery, that's for sure. Other films I would suggest on this genre would be Talk to Me, the recent hit from, 2023? 2022? I think it's 2022. You know, because you get the Aussie accents, it's pretty classic, some great possession work, some great visual style, and it's pretty fresh, pretty new, so that's a good, dynamic range to show how we can really present the formula and the genre. But I also want to mention Relic as well, which is a 2020 film, if not 2021. It was meant to come out, but then the pandemic happened, so it went straight to streaming. But I actually ended up seeing the premiere. Technically, it was at Acme in like 2022. And this is one of those like family drama. It's a very focused film on just a few characters set in Australia, set in a landscape. And it's one of those kind of slow burn horror films that represents aging and generational kind of issues and stuff like that. It's a very interesting and compelling film, very well acted and well shot. It's very good. So those are 3 from the horror genre that I would definitely suggest as good staples of the range of the Australian peoples. Hello. The next one I have is drama. For drama, which technically really considers every goddamn film that's ever existed, which I think is kind of funny. But I specifically went with The Cost, which is a recent film that came out, last year, 2023. Written and directed by Matthew Holmes, who I recently actually interviewed, which is not the reason I'm including in this list, but also because it's a great showcase of both the Australian range as for acting, but also the low-budget nature. Really encompasses like just how we can just do shit all nitty-gritty, as well as the fact that like it shows the Australian landscape in a nice way. I love its contrast of you get the like suburban streets where for me it's like, oh my god, that's like my backyard. I'm so used to seeing that in my everyday life, and then contrasting it to just drive an hour out of the city and then bam, it's just wilderlands of just trees and shit, which is great. Like that's one that I would consider like as a landscape film especially, but It's also just a compelling story. It's morally questionable. It's good. It's a pretty intense film as well. So I could technically consider it a horror film to some degree because it has those themes and tropes. But I figured drama was a more straight approach for it, given its subject matter. In terms of comedy, I want to look at my favourite Australian film, which is Love Serenade, directed by Shirley Barrett. And this is one of those classic, like, quirky comedy kind of stuff, you know? It's small town, it's low budget, it's just a bunch of people doing their daily lives and things just happen to dramatically shift. You got Miranda Otto in it, who's absolutely fantastic. It's just got a great cast of fun characters, and it's one of those things that I love about Australian films where we can just have a cast of, hey, I kind of recognize that guy, or like, I feel like we're almost like a country of character actors, you know? So like all these films can just display a bunch of people who just can embody so many different characters and so many different personalities, and I really appreciate that about it. Again, it's also an outback town, but fuck nowhere, very Australian in that regard. But it's also a representation of the multicultural nature of Australia, and also just how weird and kooky we are one of our comedies. I mean, my other options for this would be Muriel's Wedding on the Castle, which is very iconic Australian films, all in the same time period, late 90s, early 2000s. Like, they're quotable, they're funny, they're quirky, they're goofy. Like, if you don't get on board with the humour, you won't like them, but that doesn't really matter, because there's a different taste to them, and that's what's uniquely Australian about them. You know, like trying to adapt the British comedy into an American TV show. It just doesn't always translate well. For sci-fi, I wanted to go with Upgrade. Mostly because it's a really bloody cool film, and Leigh Whannell directs the shit out of it. But it's also one of those classic secretly filmed in Australia films, and by that I mean in terms of like Predestination as well, which I would also consider in this list of a interesting sci-fi concept that, whether you like or dislike how it's portrayed in the end, it at least has something different to it, both on a visual and narrative scale. And both of them have great casts as well, very Australian casts, some American actors as well, a varied range of people from different backgrounds, but in terms of their filming locations, it's bloody obviously Melbourne. Like, there are streets there that's like so uniquely Melbourne. You got the bluestone kind of pathways and streets and alleys and shit. Like, there's stuff that you just can't get anywhere else. There's so many shots of it, and specifically for Upgrade, which is set in like futuristic San Francisco, and I watch it and I'm like, I'm sorry, that's like Southern Cross Station. What the fuck are you talking about? This isn't bloody San Francisco. That actor's Australian. So is that one. And it's just got a great visual style to it, you know? So, yeah, I don't know. It's good stuff. And last but not least, we've got Apocalyptic, because the benefit of the Australian landscape, which I could have easily gone with something that like romanticizes our country in terms of something like Picnic at Hanging Rock, where it's just so mystical and mysterious and just, what the fuck is a kangaroo? Like that kind of weird shit. But then you get something that's so contrasting to that. It's just desert. It's Mad Max 2, by the way, the Road Warrior. It's again the epitome of kind of low budget. I feel like it is low budget just for the element of it has that look, but it has like that kind of gritty feel to it, almost Grindhouse-esque in a way. But it's also just crazy characters, crazy costuming, just the middle of nowhere, looks mental, is just such an insane, visceral experience to watch. I mean, you can't go wrong. I mean, also just any George Miller film, realistically, including Happy Feet and Babe, especially Babe 2. But, yeah, it's just, I could just go mad with just George Miller as a genre if I really wanted to. But it's such a fun thing to contrast all these films with. Like, they all have tropes that connect, you know. You've got obviously like Australian casts and location and stuff, but like outside of the basic necessity, you've got stuff like displaying like the landscape, the rural areas, small town, big city, apocalyptic natures to just the most regular daily shit. And I really like how we have such a range. Like, obviously, this isn't, like, so unique that, like, it's not seen in any other goddamn country when you look at any other film. But there's just something about how it's displayed and how it's discussed thematically and how it enriches the property of a film, especially in Australia. Yeah, it's again, these aren't like always exclusive like narratives or thematic approaches to stuff that you don't see in other films. It's not always the most unique thing, but we got a style, we got a twang to it that's uniquely our own, which I really appreciate. So it's like when I look at something like Letterboxd and see how it's like, these are the Australian films that you've watched, and it has something that's like Aquaman 2 or some shit, which is like a lot of films that are either production has parts in Australia because of our special effects company. So a lot of Marvel films have like made in Victoria logos and shit because we have a great visual effects industry. But they do film a lot of stuff in Queensland as well, so I could have easily included something like Scooby-Doo from 2002, but because it's such a specifically American film, there ain't many Australian actors on it outside of like Neil Fanning, who's like one of the only people who I could point out to be a big Australian person, who's not even a big Australian person. He just voiced Scooby-Doo because he was just the guy there, you know? So, and I've met him, great guy. But it's just one of those things of like, Australia is a country that can just be a template basis for stuff. Again, like how on Upgrade it's futuristic San Francisco and shit like that, where it's like Canada, you know. The Americans will come and shoot here and claim it's America, and then when you watch it, you're like, that's not America. It's like Love and Monsters, which is another one of my favorites, which would go in the sci-fi era as well, because it's even Apocalyptic. Hell, that definitely would go into Apocalyptic, where it's an American cast and crew, but then half of the cast is actually Australian, and to the point that one of the villains is Australian. It's shot in Victoria and Sydney, and it's very obviously shot there because it's one of those, oh, how do you make America look different in an apocalypse? You go outside and suddenly you got tan bark, and you got fucking eucalyptus trees and shit like that. Like, you don't exactly get bloody koalas and shit, but like, you get some very obvious, visually distinct Australian nature to it. So Love and Monsters would definitely go in the apocalyptic genre as well, where they've pretending it's America, but it's Australia, but they at least still got Australian cast and crew, which I do appreciate. So yeah, that's a fun thing. So yeah, I don't know, Australian films are very vast and very different, and can just be simply utilised in the most basic areas, but then you can get the most impressive stuff you've ever seen on a cinematic approach. So yeah, so if you haven't seen any of these films, I definitely recommend all of them. Outside of that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. If you have any Australian films that you really love, comment down below, and I'll see if I am embarrassed enough to admit that I haven't seen them. Okay, bye.